you have to vacate the property immediately.
Today, we are diving into a law that's set to reshape Ontario as we know it. Bill 60, the Fighting Delays, Building Faster Act. Now, this is one of the most ambitious and frankly controversial pieces of legislation we've seen in years. It promises to solve our huge housing and transit crises, but as we're about to see, that promise of speed, well, it comes with a pretty hefty price tag.
I mean, just imagine for a second. What if we could just slice through all the red tape that holds our cities back? What if we could get new subways, more housing, better roads, all in a fraction of the time? That's the really powerful idea driving Bill 60, but it forces us to ask a really critical question. In this huge rush to build faster, what are we being forced to leave behind?
So, why this sudden need for speed? I mean, a bill this massive doesn't just appear out of thin air. Let's dig into the pressures that were building up all across Ontario that pushed the government to take such a drastic step.
The province was really facing a perfect storm of problems. You had a really severe housing crisis, with people just getting pushed right out of the market. Transit projects, they were stuck in the mud for years. Our roads were just choked with gridlock. And on top of all that, even the government's own tribunals, like the Landlord and Tenant Board, were absolutely buried in backlogs. So the government's argument was pretty straightforward. The whole system is broken, and the only way to fix it is to just make everything faster.
And the government's answer to all these problems? You guessed it, Bill 60. But this wasn't some small, targeted fix. Nope, this was a huge package of reforms designed to completely overhaul the whole system all at once.
So what is this thing exactly? Bill 60 is what's known as an omnibus bill. You can kind of think of it like a legislative Swiss Army knife. Instead of just creating one new law, it goes in and changes dozens of existing laws all at the same time, with one big overarching goal: speed up construction, speed up transit projects, and speed up government decisions. Period.
And wow, when we say its reach is broad, we mean broad. Just take a look at this chart to see everything this bill touches. We're not just talking about building sites and new subways. It makes fundamental changes to housing and planning, it completely rewrites landlord-tenant law, and it even sets up new ways to manage our water. I mean, it really gets its hands into almost every single part of how our communities are built and run.
Okay, so that's the big picture. But this is where it gets real. What does all of this actually mean for you? Let's break down the real-world impacts for different groups all across Ontario.
All right, let's dive into maybe one of the most heated parts of this whole thing: the relationship between tenants and landlords. Bill 60 dramatically shifts the balance of power here, and renters and property owners are really feeling it. So, the bill makes some pretty major changes to speed up the Landlord and Tenant Board, or the LTB. First off, eviction timelines for not paying rent, they get shorter. At the same time, and this is a really controversial one, a new rule means tenants have to pay half of the rent they supposedly owe before they can even bring up their own issues, like, say, a landlord who isn't doing repairs. On top of that, the board's power to refuse an eviction it thinks is unfair could be limited, and the window to even ask for a review of a decision, it's been slashed in half, from 30 days down to just 15. And to really understand why this is such a big deal, you have to look at the numbers tenant advocates are pointing to. With over 81,000 people experiencing homelessness in Ontario, a number that's jumped by 25% in just a couple of years, they're arguing that making evictions faster and harder to fight could pour gasoline on an already burning fire.
And yeah, this table really lays out the huge divide here. On one hand, supporters say speeding up the LTB helps everyone by just clearing out those massive backlogs. But on the other side, opponents say, whoa, hold on, this just tilts the whole process towards making evictions easier. Where the government sees cutting red tape, critics see a direct threat to a tenant's ability to get a fair hearing and ultimately to keep their home.
Okay, let's shift gears now. We're moving from housing to our roads, because this bill also wades right into that really heated debate over how we share street space, and it has some big things to say to both drivers and cyclists.
Okay, so here's the big one. A new provincial rule basically says municipalities can't, for the most part, take away a car lane to put in a bike lane. The government's reason? They say it's all about keeping traffic moving and having the same road standards everywhere in the province.
But as you can imagine, critics see this very differently. They argue this rule completely ties the hands of local city planners. They say it stops cities from actually redesigning their own streets to make them safer for everyone, pedestrians, cyclists, you name it, and to hit their own climate goals. For them, this isn't about standards, it's a huge step backward.
And believe me, the impacts don't stop at bike lanes. Bill 60 goes even deeper. fundamentally changing the whole relationship between the province, our local city halls, and the developers who actually build our communities.
And some of these changes are, wow, they're really significant. For starters, Metrolinx, the provincial transit agency, it now gets these sweeping new powers to just take over municipal land and infrastructure for its projects. The rules for how cities pay for growth through development charges have been totally rewritten. And maybe the biggest shift of all, the province can now create these brand new provincially run corporations to manage local water services, taking that control right out of the hands of City Hall.
So when you kind of zoom out and look at all these different pieces together, one central conflict just snaps into focus. It's this massive tug-of-war between the power of the province and the control of our local towns and cities.
And really, this is the absolute core of the argument against Bill 60. Critics see it as this huge power grab, tipping the scales of decision-making away from the people we elect locally and putting it all in the hands of the provincial government.
So how does this actually work in practice? Well, a key part of it has to do with something called provincial policy statements. Just think of them as the official rulebook for any kind of land use planning. Now here's the big change. Bill 60 lets the minister issue planning orders that don't have to follow that rulebook. This gives them this incredible new power to approve projects even if they would have been a no-go under the province's own existing rules.
So, at the end of the day, this whole thing boils down to a really fundamental trade-off. It forces all of us to ask, what are we really willing to give up in the name of progress? And this chart right here, it really sums up that fundamental choice. On one side, you've got what the supporters are focused on, speed and efficiency. And you can't argue with the fact that we have real crises in housing and transit. But on the other side, you have the cost that opponents are really worried about. We're talking about a loss of local, democratic control over our own communities and the stripping away of really important protections for tenants and the environment.
So, that leaves us with this one final, powerful question. Look, Bill 60 is all about building things faster, but it's also, without a doubt, going to build them differently, with new rules, new people in charge, and a whole new set of priorities. So the question for everyone is that a price we're willing to pay?